the story. A strange story of a peaceful mission that turned into one of America's most historic battles. And you'll hear another story. The story of an actor who became one of baseball's greatest pitchers because he was cast as a ball player in a movie. Yes, this is the story. Six Indians, mounted on lithe but powerful ponies, urged their mounts up the steep incline of the bluff. At the summit, they reined to a stop. Out across the undulating prairie to the north, they saw what they'd been looking for. Grazing quietly in the blazing heat of a blistering Montana sun was a herd of several hundred buffalo. Smiles touched the lips of the Indians. The animals munching the brown prairie grass represented life itself, meat for food, and hides with which the Indian could clothe himself. There had been a time when such a herd would have aroused no particular interest in the red man. Once millions of bison had roamed the plains in herds 10 times as large as this. But then the white man had come, slaughtering the bison by the thousands merely for the sport of it, or for the hides alone. The herds had been so badly decimated that the 6 tribes of the great Sioux nation had been forced to band together with the Cheyennes in order to hunt them out. The 6 Indian horsemen were scouts for over 2,000 Sioux and Cheyenne hunters waiting in their camp a half a day's ride away to hear just one word: buffalo. The 6 Indians made a quick decision, and 3 of the group swung their horses around and galloped off to the camp of the Sioux and Cheyennes. The other 3 remained behind to keep the herd under surveillance. Slowly and silently, the 3 men moved closer to the herd, then dismounted and took up their vigil. They did not dare strike until the other huntsmen arrived. One false move on their part might, they knew, frighten their quarry into stampeding away in headlong fright. That's why looks of apprehension crossed their faces when suddenly the sky grew sullen. Heavy black clouds rolled in from the north, blotting out the sun. Rain started to fall. And then the thing the Indians feared happened. A jagged streak of red knifed across the sky. Lightning. Lightning and its inevitable aftermath. Thunder. The buffalo lifted their heads from the grass and began milling around. Again, lightning streaked across the sky, and again. With the second blast of thunder, the herd of bison bolted, stampeding off to the north. The 3 Indian scouts could do nothing but stand helplessly by and watch them go. They could not follow. The bison might run for miles before they stopped, and the 3 scouts had to remain to meet the main body of hunters, which would be arriving the following morning. And when the other hunters did arrive, the chiefs of the 6 Sioux nations and the Cheyennes held a conference. The herd that had stampeded off to the north still represented their best chance for meat and hides. They would follow the herd, track it down. The order went out. 2,000 warriors mounted their horses and rode northward. And though they did not know it, the Indians were not the only horsemen riding the Montana plains that June day. As they raced north, they were seen by other men, white men, scouts attached to the United States cavalry. With one look, the white men were certain they knew the meaning of that huge assemblage of Indians: war. It wasn't long before the Indian hunters had again located the herd of buffalo that they'd lost in the rainstorm. And the bison, having run out their fear of the thunder and lightning, were grazing quietly on the banks of a small river. The huge band of hunters deployed for the attack. An attack which they never made, for suddenly out of the east came the sound of charging horsemen and the rattle of deadly rifle fire. In one horrible moment of realization, the Sioux and the Cheyennes knew that they were no longer the hunters, but the hunted, the attacked, and not the attackers. Perhaps in that bewildering moment when they were unexpectedly hit by several troops of U.S. cavalry, the Indians knew that the peaceful mission which had brought them to the banks of the small Montana River had been mistaken for a warlike sortie into the white man's domain. Perhaps they never knew the reason for the attack. No man can say. But any bewilderment they experienced at the moment of the attack did not last long. Confusion was soon ignited into white-hot hatred. Even if they knew the white men were making a mistake, there was no chance to explain. Absorbing the first shock of the cavalry attack, the Sioux and the Cheyennes struck back. Led by their greatest warriors, chiefs who were wise in the ways of fighting the white man, and outnumbering the cavalry by 10 to 1, the Indians turned the tide of battle in a matter of minutes. Almost as quickly as it had begun, The sound of rifle fire shattering the afternoon quiet was still. And 215 men, the entire force of the attacking cavalry, including its commanding officer, lay dead. Yes, in the time it takes a person to smoke a cigarette, one of the most famous and senseless battles in American history had been fought and won. Won by the Sioux and the Cheyennes, who had come to the banks of the Little Bighorn River because the bison they were hunting had been stampeded by a rainstorm. Yes, except for the thunder and lightning that frightened a herd of buffalo, one of the bloodiest chapters in American history, the Battle of the Little Bighorn, a battle more popularly known as Custer's Last Stand, would never have had to be written. This is the story.
When he had tied the laces of his spiked shoes, the young man stepped across the locker room and looked at himself in the mirror. He smiled ruefully at his reflection and mumbled,
"Well, I guess you look like a ball player anyway."
The bitterness in the youth's voice was unmistakable. Here was the day he had dreamed of. The day when he would put on the uniform of a Major League Baseball team and walk out into the warm Florida sunshine to commence spring training. Yes, it was the day he had dreamed of. And yet it wasn't. He had been issued a uniform, a neat white uniform with the name Brooklyn stitched across the front of the shirt. And in a few minutes, he was going to walk out onto the playing field, and several hundred pairs of eyes were going to be glued on him when he pitched to make sure his every movement was just right. And yet, this was a hollow mockery of the dream he had dreamed.
"Hey, we're waiting for you out there. Come on."
The kid turned, nodded to the man who had stuck his head in the locker room door. He was ready. Picked up his glove, walked out onto the field. No one said anything to him as he went to the mound. He'd been told exactly what to do. Catcher tossed him a ball. Kid looked over at a man in street clothes kneeling between home and first.
"Okay, kid, let's go."
Batter stepped into the box. Catcher squatted behind the plate. Kid wound up, and his left arm whipped the ball toward the plate. The batter swung and missed. Catcher returned the ball. Kid looked at it thoughtfully. Something told him that he could strike out the man at the plate. He could. He could if only he were permitted to. But he wasn't. The batter was supposed to hit the second ball. That was the way it had been planned. And that's what the batter did. He drove a screening liner into the left field. For an hour, the kid pitched as he'd been told to pitch, always fighting the temptation to bear down long enough to strike out one of the hitters. Finally, the man kneeling near first base stood up, raised his arms, and shouted,
"Cut! Cut! 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 That does it for today. Get those cameras off the field now, right away."
Cameras. Yes, that's what the kid had been pitching for, the movie cameras. And the eyes that had watched him so critically hadn't been concerned with his pitching ability. They'd been appraising his acting technique. For that's what he was, not a ball player, but an actor, signed to portray the part of an average kid trying to make the grade with a Major League ball club. When the director of the movie had seen him, he'd called him a natural for the part. But no one seemed to know or care that he was a natural, because his movie role was one he'd dreamed of playing in real life. While the Dodgers resumed their training schedule, the kid walked back to the locker room, started to change to his street clothes. Suddenly he felt a hand clapped on his shoulder. Turned. The hand belonged to Joe Schott, a left-handed pitcher who was a veteran of 12 Major League campaigns.
"Hey, you really look like a pitcher out there today, kid. You ever play any ball?"
Maybe it was the warm, almost fatherly attitude of Joe Schott that started the kid talking. But whatever it was, the boy told his story before he knew it. The story of how he had come south to try to train with one of the big league teams, and how, when that seemed impossible, he had been spotted to play the pitcher in the movie that was being shot in the Brooklyn camp. Schott listened, and when the story was over, he said slowly,
"Tell you what, kid, meet me out here a little early in the morning, and let's take a look at what you've got. If you've got anything, huh?"
It didn't take long for Schott to see that the kid had something. Speed, anyway. A fastball that fairly sizzled. But baseball-wise, Joe Schott knew that wasn't enough.
"Hey, look, you've got to have more than a fastball, kid. Control. You've got to have control. Now, come on, let's work on it."
And work on it they did. For hours at a time, the kid threw. Day after day, Joe Schott badgered and criticized and cursed.
"Terrible, terrible. Look. Put it here, kid, right here." No. Here.
And then it came, the day the Dodgers broke camp and started the long exhibition trek northward. The kid's heart was like a chunk of lead. For all his work, no one in camp, with the exception of Shout, had taken the slightest notice of him. As far as the Dodgers were concerned, he was still just an actor. And when Joe Shout called him to his room, the kid knew what he was going to say. He was going to tell him to forget it, that he might be a good actor, but he'd never be a pitcher.
Sit down, kid. I got news for you. The Dodgers are giving you a contract. Mm-hmm. You're being sent to Dayton, Ohio for seasoning. Yes, sir. You're on your way. I'm not saying where you're going, but you're on your way.
Yes, the kid was on his way to the most remarkable feat any major league pitcher ever performed. On his way to a memorable night in June 1938 in Ebbets Field, home of the Brooklyn Dodgers. But he wasn't the property of the Dodgers anymore. He was pitching for the Cincinnati Reds. And when Leo DeRocher flied out for the last out in the ninth inning, the stands broke forth in one of the most thunderous tributes ever paid a ball player. The kid had reached the goal every pitcher dreams of someday attaining. A no-run, no-hit game. But that was only half the story. 4 nights before, in Boston, he had done the same thing. Yes, in Brooklyn, against the team whose uniform he wore as an actor and not a pitcher, the kid became the first man in the history of Major League Baseball to pitch 2 no-run, no-hit games in succession. Johnny Vander Meer. Yes, this is the story.